Listening to Maine Calling. From the Maine Public Radio studios, I'm Jennifer Rooks, and this is a special Your Vote 2018 Maine Calling. My guest this half hour is Tiffany Bond, who is running as an independent candidate for Congress representing Maine's 2nd Congressional District. What questions do you have for her? Our phone number 1-800-399-3566. You can send a brief email to talk@mainepublic.org, tweet at MaineCalling, or post to the Maine Calling Facebook page. Welcome to Maine Calling, Tiffany.
Thank you for having me.
I'll start with the big question. Why should people vote for you?
We're doing it wrong. The way that we run Congress, we're just not paying attention to the actual job. And maybe we should start hiring people who like to spend time with bills, who like to spend time reading and looking for problems that impact us on the backside, instead of people that spend their days fundraising.
What is the biggest issue facing the constituents of the 2nd District, and how will you address it if elected?
All the issues are important. I think the biggest issue is right now we have representation that doesn't understand the consequences of federal law on the average 2nd Congressional District person. That causes a host of problems, from tax code being put together in a way that doesn't help us to there being work requirements, which have some really negative consequences for aid. So there's a wide range of things, but I think the biggest thing that we need to change at the federal level is having somebody who's actually going through that. And I think that's a very different take than you're probably hearing from other candidates.
What, if anything, ought to be done about the partisan divide in our nation?
Well, I'm an independent, so I can work with almost anyone. I think that we've forgotten how to use our language in a way that helps people work together. For example, you can talk about healthcare, and you can approach somebody with a Democrat leaning, and you can say, look, if I can expand healthcare and I can cover more people, do you really care how that happens or how it needs to be worded? And I think a lot of people are going to say, yeah, go for it. And you can approach somebody who's got a Republican leaning, and you can say, look, you're paying a lot of money right now. You're not getting very much coverage. And maybe you feel like you're paying for people to get covered when you can't even access healthcare. If I have a way to fix that costs about the same as what you're doing now, can I work on that? And I think you're also going to get that yes. So I think there's a lot of goals we have that overlap, but we're just using wording that is adversarial, that doesn't help us come together.
Should access to affordable health care be a national priority? And if so, what should Congress do to ensure it?
I think that we take the law as it stands right now, and that's just what the law is, and we continually take little bites to improve it. Right now we have the ACA, which has federal intervention, and that is the law. So we should be looking at that, and every time we touch it, find a way to improve coverage, decrease costs, increase access, reimburse providers in a more efficient way that helps them run their practice. And so I don't think the question is, should we have federal intervention or should we not? We already have federal intervention. It's how do we make that intervention more effective for the average person?
On what committee would you like to serve and why, or what committees?
I'd really like to serve on the Intelligence Committee. I think that would be something that would be very interesting to me personally. But I'm open. I think there's a lot of different things that cross Maine's path. I think working in any of the committees that touch environmental issues is something that would be really important. Taxation is something that's very important to me. Veterans Affairs are very important to me. So I would have to see what committee appointments are available.
All right. We have a lot of questions that have come in different forms, Tiffany. We're speaking with Tiffany Bond, 2nd District Independent Candidate for Congress. The first is a voicemail question that has come in before this show began.
This is Jeff from Biddeford. And what are one or two specific measures you would support to ensure the long-term financial solvency of Social Security?
So Social Security is set up as an insurance program, and we shouldn't be tapping into that fund but shouldn't and haven't are not the same thing. I think that we should really be going back and treating it like that insurance pool and that insurance program and staying away from tapping into it. And I think that we have a responsibility to essentially make that kind of its own whole separate system again instead of what we have been doing. And I don't think that's been a priority. In fact, I think that the priority we've seen has been to create a deficit that makes us go after that fund more enthusiastically. So I think that we should definitely be shifting the priority back towards treating that as its own standalone. We don't touch this for anything except Social Security Fund.
A call coming in live. Kevin in Old Town. Go ahead, Kevin. You are on Maine Calling.
Hello.
Yes, go
Hello.
ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yes, I would like to know if Tiffany is going to go there and be a check on President Trump.
I think regardless of whoever is in power, Republicans or Democrats, you'll find me to be a check. I will not vote for what I consider to be bad law, period. That there will be some compromises that I have to make to vote for things that make trade-offs. But right now we have a Congress that is deficient and is not functioning as a check, and they should be.
An email from Ken. Do you support elevating Katahdin Woods and Waters from National Monument to National Park?
Yes.
Can you expand on that?
I think that it's an excellent way to get extra resources to Maine, and anything that we can do to bolster our natural resources here and increase tourism helps drive our economy.
An email from Renee. I would like to know if there are concerns that could be put into an effort to create our own net neutrality laws like other states have done since the Trump administration pulled the rules that were in place.
I think that's probably a question for the state legislature and gubernatorial candidates, but I am absolutely in favor of net neutrality. So should a well-written bill come up in the federal government, absolutely I would vote for that.
All right, we'll go to another voicemail question that came in before today's program.
This is Jill from Brunswick. Climate scientists and the UN Secretary General have warned global leaders to rein in carbon emissions faster or risk runaway global warming. Do you have any ideas about how we could attack this difficult problem in Maine? What is your solution for the nation?
I think that there's a variety of mechanisms, and we shouldn't be taking any of them off the table. Things from, carbon tax to tax incentives to prohibitions. Those are really the three mechanisms in a general sense that the federal government has. They can either give you the carrot, which is the tax incentive. They can give you the stick, which is the tax penalty, or they can outright prohibit activity. We're going to need a range of solutions to be working on the environment. And I think they need to be data and science driven. That's something that hasn't been a priority and definitely should be. I have 2 children. They deserve a world to grow up in that is stable and sustainable. And we have not been focused on that recently.
We're talking with 2nd District Independent candidate Tiffany Bond. This is Your Vote 2018 special coverage on Maine Calling. If you'd like to join the conversation, our phone number 1-800-399-3566. You can send us tweet at Maine Calling. You can quickly send a brief email to talk@mainepublic.org or post on our Facebook page. We'll go to another voicemail question that came in before this show began.
Hello, my name is Ann, and I live in Saco. And my question is, given that there's obviously a long game being played by the opponents of Roe v. Wade, what is your specific stand on reproductive rights and on Planned Parenthood? Thank you.
So I don't think the federal government should be making our medical decisions. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me whether it's on whether or not terminations are an option or cancer care or bunion surgery. When you get into those intimate personal decisions about what you should be doing or cannot do to your body. I think as long as it's a safe medical procedure, that the federal government should not be intervening. I've always found the national conversation on it to be frustrating and a little confounding because it's what you're doing to yourself. So I think it's a privacy decision, and I don't think we should be expanding any restrictions on that. I think that's a decision you make with your doctor.
All right. And now to another voicemail question.
This is Betsy from Standish. How do you tell the difference between fake news and real news? And would you please give us one or two of your favorite sources for reliable information? Thank you.
Well, fake news is getting better these days. I think that what I do is I read a spectrum of news. So I read all the way from the far right to the far left and try and process what seems likely. I have 4 degrees, so I will often check academic sources, but a lot of times those require passwords and access that the average person does not have. What I try to do is I try to look for something that passes the sniff test. There's a lot of things today where if you find yourself scratching your head and saying, is this an Onion article? I think you should certainly be dealing with digging a little bit deeper. I would say my favorite sources, I really like local news. They tend to address issues a little bit more intimately than you're going to get on a national level. And I like to read a variety of mainstream publications. I find that if you kind of go across 2 or 3 of them, you tend to get a fairly good assessment. And then I also try to read at least 1 or 2 international publications as well.
We'll go to Bob, who's calling from Portland. Hi, Bob. Go ahead. You're on Maine Calling with candidate Tiffany Bond.
Yes, I'd like to ask, in light of the Janus Supreme Court decision that says that unions cannot require non-members to pay fair share fees, whether or not she would support legislation that would require she support legislation that would allow that unions don't have to represent people who don't become members or pay fair share. Currently, the way the law is structured, that if a person, the member of a if a person, employee of the bargaining unit, they have the union has to represent them regardless of whether or not they're a union member or whether or not they pay fair share fees. So the question would be, put on a level playing field, would she support the fact that unions don't have to represent people who don't pay their fair share?
I haven't read the holding in Janus, and since it's a relatively new decision, I haven't had the ability to reach out to union leaders and get input. I think that's one where I would phone a friend. I think that you can't possibly know the entire breadth of everything covered on the federal level. And it's really important to be able to say, I don't know the answer to that, but I will check and reach out to people who are impacted by that before I would make a decision.
Bob, thanks so much for calling in with a question for Tiffany Bond. If you have a question for her, give us a call, 1-800-399-3566. Laura on Facebook has a question about the arts. She says, how do you intend to support the cultural sector?
I think arts are very important. I was a Parks and Recreation commissioner in another life years ago, and as a part of the program that we had in that town, we always made sure we dedicated 2% of every project to arts. And I think it ended up being something that was really wonderful for the community. We ended up with art in unexpected ways and places, and having things that provide both an emotional outlet and a measure of creativity and beauty, I think, is very important. I think that what we have for our federal budget for art is minuscule in portion to the rest of the budget, and I would definitely not support cutting it further. In fact, I would probably want to grow it at a rate of inflation or greater.
All right. We have a voicemail question.
Hi, my name is Celia, and I'm from Bangor. And my question is for Tiffany Bond. And I'd love to know what Ms. Bond is going to do about lowering the price of prescription drugs if she's elected. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
I think that we need to be ripping apart what we've got going on in healthcare on a variety of levels, and prescription drugs are certainly a concern. I read the ACA in a couple of different formats, once when it was around 1,400 pages, once when it was a little over 2,000 pages. We have a ton of things in there that we need to go in and update. And I think working with drug companies and negotiating on a greater level, potentially opening up to out-of-market purchases. I think those are two really good places we can start on prescription drug coverage. And I think that we can maybe look at how and when we make drugs available for generics as a way to help as well.
All right. We have an email from Lavinia. How will you address generational poverty, situational poverty, and working poverty in Maine? Hint, these are not the same things.
They aren't the same things, but I think they have some of the same solutions. So the area of law I work in is family law, and that's when we take families and reconfigure them essentially. The average household income is about $40,000 a year in the 2nd Congressional District, and that's never enough to make two households. The transition programs that we have are not they don't induce people to make the next step because they don't transition well. And I think that we need to look at those transitions and gradations of how people are both incented and supported to get into the workforce, as well as looking at how we tax our corporations to support those. I think that as we are moving towards retooling the economy, I think that we're probably going to end up readdressing tax code, because the tax code that was passed last December has some fairly severe flaws. I think as we start looking at that and start looking at how we move people into the workforce, when we're talking about subsidies and TANF and food stamp programs, we need to look at how we get people off. And I don't think things like work requirements are the way to get there. I think having a better gradation into middle class is the way to get there.
And I want to follow up, Tiffany. You mentioned that you think there are some serious flaws in the new tax code. What are those flaws, and what would you like to change?
Do I get another couple hours?
No.
I mean, it's from broad sweeping things. Like I think the corporate tax code that they put in there, the cut was much more drastic than it needed to be. Certainly there was some room to make adjustments, all the way down to little things. Like one of the things you'll hear me speak about all the time that just frosts my cupcakes is that we changed the way that we tax spousal support. Spousal support's been taxed the same since the 40s. And Maine disproportionately uses spousal support because it's a lower income state. And so we have a lot of people who have taken time out of the workforce. It used to be that if you received spousal support, it was taxed as if you were paying an employee of the former marriage. The marriage had made a decision to have that person stay out of the workforce, and that was essentially their severance package. The new tax code switches it so that it's no longer a deduction to the payor and a taxable event to the payee. Now it has changed so the person who makes more money pays taxes on it. Didn't generate a whole lot of revenue for the federal government, but really hosed a lot of people in Maine. So anybody who gets a spousal support judgment after December 31st of this year is now going to be stuck with these higher tax consequences that if somebody was paying attention, it wouldn't have been a problem. We could have pulled that out and said, you know what, there's really not much benefit, and this really hurts people, disproportionately women who are poor.
An email from John. Who would you support for Speaker of the House?
I think it's premature to ask that question because I don't know who the candidates are going to be. I think this is a wonky year, and we've had a lot of upsets of people who maybe were potential candidates that are no longer in the running because they were knocked out in the primaries. I would say that whoever makes the most sense for policy, and that's a balance of things, whoever is going to be the most nonpartisan, whoever is going to work on functional law and compromise, and whoever is going to really pay attention to how things are actually impacting constituents. And that last piece, I feel, is very much missing in D.C. right now. I don't think we have a lot of people paying attention to how the average person gets impacted by these choices.
All right, an email question for you. We're speaking with Tiffany Bond, who's an independent candidate in the 2nd Congressional District for U.S. House. This email is from David. Each year, Mainers, businesses, residents, and government collectively spend $3.5 to $4 billion on fossil fuel energy coming from outside the state. What will you do to keep our energy funds in the local economy?
I think that there are a range of things we can do to work on that, and they are likely going to be something that is worked on in collaboration with whoever ends up as governor. I hope personally that the car that I'm driving is the last gasoline-powered vehicle I ever have to purchase, but that's not practical at this point in time with how our roads are and how spread out we are. So I would like to see us work on a bunch of alternative energy options, and alternative energy options are certainly easier to keep local than fossil fuels.
A question from Sally. What Maine politicians do you look up to or admire?
I don't think I've ever thought about that. Um, I haven't been particularly politically engaged prior to this couple last years. I had been working very much on the law and making sure that the laws that I was working with were functional. I admire an ad that I saw from Senator Angus King when he was up for election, where he was pulling his boots out of the mud and was talking about, let's move this to a more civilized space. I really enjoy that. I think that we've had historically a lot of really wonderful people come out of Maine. I think it's been a bit dramatic for my taste lately, and I'd like to see us work on being more collaborative than competitive.
Another email, this one from Phil. What would you say is something that people don't know about the 2nd Congressional District? A hidden gem or something you want to focus on?
The 2nd Congressional District makes almost everything. Like anything you could want. So instead of fundraising, I'm Maine raising. I ask people to not give me any money and instead either contribute to a local charity or to shop with a local business and say that I won't take money. And it's certainly in more detail on my website. But as I started going through and developing this program, I mean, whether it's custom shoes or artisanal jams or almost anything handcrafted that you can imagine is made in the 2nd Congressional District. And I love that. I love that the 2nd Congressional District is full of artisans and artists that just create amazing things that can be exported from Maine.
We're talking with 2nd Congressional District candidate Tiffany Bond. Tiffany, why run for Congress? You don't have a lot of political experience, all sorts of things you could be running for in November. Why Congress?
I really like federal law, and I think that's unique among the candidates. State law is great. It's processional. It starts with purpose and definitions and works its way through the law almost like a story. Federal law is like a treasure hunt, and I deal with it all the time at my work. And I actually look forward to the idea of sitting in a room and going through thousands of pages every week on that treasure hunt to see what is missing or wrong or could be better. And I think that's a piece that's been missing from the federal government for a long time. And maybe we should put some of that back.
You have a Twitter feed that, and I may be mischaracterizing this, Tiffany, where you read bills. Tell me about that and why you do that.
Well, that's part of it, certainly. I think it's important to be honest about what federal law does do and doesn't do and whether or not people are actually reading it. And that's a bipartisan problem. I can tell you that on both sides of the aisle, there are an awful lot of people that maybe are voting on stuff based on advice or voting on stuff based on a bill name. And if you don't get in and read it, you don't know what you're accountable for, right? We're accountable for our car insurance binders and how many people read those. So we should be having something as important as federal law that really has a lot of attention paid to it. I also try to put federal law into plain English so it's understandable because I think these bills are very difficult. One of my clients a couple years ago characterized me as turning nonsense into common sense, and that's what I really try to do with bills. If you go on Twitter and go under moments, there's actually a bunch of bill reads that I've done, and that should give you a feel for what you should be looking for when you're hiring for the job because this is a job interview.
If you are elected to Congress, you'll be a very junior member of a very large body. What kind of confidence do you have that you will actually be able to make a difference, especially in those bills that you see as being nonsensical or with too much hidden and secretive language?
Given the composition of the House, I think I'll probably be disproportionately influential even as a junior member because I'm likely to be a swing vote. I'm likely to say, hey, I do like fiscal efficiency, so I'm happy to work with Republicans who have historically been very focused on that. I'm happy to work on that. I'm also pretty socially liberal, and I really want to make sure that social issues don't get lost in the shuffle of DC. So I think that I'm going to be good at pointing out problems that are easy to fix. And I think that I also am going to be somebody that's seen as a vote that can be grabbed by either side.
An email from Frank. Are Mainers taxed too little, too much, or just right? And why?
At the federal level, probably mostly right. We don't have a lot of large corporations here, so we don't pay a lot of those federal taxes. And we are a low-wage state, so we are a net recipient of tax dollars. At the state level, I'll leave that question to the gubernatorial candidates.
Okay, and I think this is our final question, Tiffany, about the nation's debt. What do we do?
So there are times when deficit spending is appropriate. When you are headed into a recession and trying to head that off, that's a really good time for deficit spending. It is shocking that we have deficit spending going right now in what should be a great economy, and we should be replenishing our coffers. So I have a big problem with that. I'm not a big fan of balanced budget amendments because there are times when you do need to have deficit spending, and there are times when you need to save up for a rainy day, and we're just spending.
Well, Tiffany Bond, thank you so much for joining us on Maine Calling today. The voice you've been hearing for the last half hour is Tiffany Bond, who is running for Congress in Maine's 2nd District. She is an independent. Nikki Shields ran the board today. You can find all of our Your Vote 2018 interviews, as well as more information on the candidates and their positions on the Maine Public website. Today's program will be rebroadcast this evening at 8. I'm Jennifer Rooks, and you've been listening to Maine Calling on Maine Public Radio.